Pay attention to the security camera footage. October 14th, 2018. A quiet classroom. You see a teacher sitting on his desk, but underneath him, a woman is hiding. A security guard walks in, checks the room, and leaves. The moment he's gone, the woman crawls out and kisses the teacher passionately. She thinks she fooled him. She didn't. That guard is her husband, and he didn't leave. He went back to the control room to watch this exact betrayal on the monitors. 5 days later, she was found dead. Before we reveal the evidence, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next case. Pay attention to the frame. The date is October 14th, 2018. The location is Oakwood High School, a sprawling brick institution in the quiet suburbs of Ohio. It is 8:15 p.m., and the hallways are dark, save for the emergency exit signs casting a long red glow on the polished linoleum. But inside the history department, in classroom 304, the lights are still humming. Security camera 04, mounted high in the corner near the ceiling tiles, captures the entire room in a wide, unblinking angle. The room is still. The rows of empty student desks create a geometric pattern of shadows. At the front, sitting atop the heavy oak teacher's desk rather than behind it, is Richard Vance. He is 62 years old, the department head, wearing a tailored gray suit that costs more than a teacher's monthly salary. He is balding, his glasses perched on his nose as he flips through a stack of papers. He looks comfortable, authoritative, like a man who owns the space he occupies. He is waiting. The door in the bottom left of the frame opens. Sarah Miller walks in. She is 26 years old, wearing a light gray blouse and a skirt that is perhaps too short for a standard school day, but the students are long gone. She moves with a nervous energy, checking the hallway behind her before closing the heavy wooden door. She doesn't walk to a student desk. She walks straight to Richard. The camera captures the body language immediately. This is not a meeting about curriculum. She leans against the desk, her posture relaxing as Richard looks up from his papers. He smiles. It is a predatory smile, confident and assured, but the atmosphere shifts in a split second. Audio from the hallway penetrates the room. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Boots striking the hard floor, getting louder. Click-clack, click-clack, the sound echoes. Sarah freezes. Her head snaps toward the door. Panic floods her face. She looks at Richard, eyes wide. There is no time to run to the back exit. There is no time to blend in as a colleague. In a move of pure desperation, Sarah drops to her knees. She crawls into the tight, dark space underneath the teacher's desk, directly between Richard's dangling legs. From the camera's high angle, you can just see the hem of her skirt vanishing into the shadows of the knee hole. Richard doesn't move. He stays perched on top of the desk, his body acting as a human shield, blocking the view of the space beneath him. He picks up a paper, adjusting his glasses, instantly composing his face into a mask of boredom. The door handle turns. The door swings open, and a man steps into the frame. This is Jason Miller. He is 28 years old, wearing the dark blue uniform of the school's contracted security firm. A flashlight hangs from his belt. He looks tired, his shoulders slumped from the weight of a double shift. He is just doing his rounds, checking for unlocked doors and fire hazards. He scans the room, his eyes landing on the older man sitting on the desk. "Evening, Mr. Vance," Jason says. His voice is respectful, deferential. He steps fully into the room. Richard looks up, feigning mild surprise. "Good evening, Jason. Everything all right?" "Just checking the perimeter, sir. Saw the light on. Wanted to make sure the alarm wasn't tripped." Jason takes a few steps closer. He is now standing less than 5 feet from the desk. "Just grading midterms," Richard replies, his voice steady, smooth. "The curse of the historian. We live in the past, so we work late in the present." Jason chuckles politely. It is an awkward sound. He glances around the room, shining his flashlight briefly toward the back windows. The beam of light cuts through the dust motes dancing in the air. Then he looks back at the desk. From the perspective of camera 04, the tension is suffocating. You can see the toe of Jason's boot. You can see Richard's polished dress shoes hanging down. And in the sliver of darkness between them, hidden only by the wood of the desk and Richard's body, is Sarah. She must be holding her breath. She must be terrified that a sneeze, a shift of fabric, or the vibration of her own heart might give her away. "Well, don't work too late, sir," Jason says, shifting his weight. "I'm locking up the main gate in 20 minutes. You'll have to use the side exit." "Understood," Richard nods dismissively. "I won't be long." Jason lingers for 1 second too long. He looks at Richard, then his gaze drifts down to the desk, then back up. It is a moment of hesitation. Does he sense something? Does he smell a familiar perfume in the air? But the moment passes. Jason nods, turns on his heel, and walks back toward the door. "Have a good night, Jason," Richard calls out. "You too, mister." Vance! The door clicks shut. The footsteps recede down the hallway. Click, clack, click, clack. Silence. For 10 seconds, nobody moves. Richard listens, head cocked to the side. When he is certain the coast is clear, he taps his heel against the side of the desk. Slowly, Sarah emerges. She crawls out from the cramped space, her hair slightly mussed, her face flushed with adrenaline. She stands up, smoothing her skirt, letting out a long, shaky exhale. She looks at the door, then at Richard. The fear evaporates, replaced instantly by the thrill of the illicit. She laughs a nervous, high-pitched sound. She steps between Richard's legs as he sits on the desktop. She wraps her arms around his neck. Richard discards the papers he was holding. He pulls her close. They kiss. It is not a quick peck. It is deep, passionate, and possessive. It is the kiss of two people who think they have successfully fooled the world. Sarah pulls back, smiling up at him, whispering something the audio doesn't catch. She thinks she is safe. She thinks the man who just left the security guard, the man she vowed to love and cherish, her husband Jason Miller, has no idea she is there. She believes the game of hide-and-seek was a success. She is wrong. The camera continues to record as they embrace, oblivious to the fact that the game ended the moment Jason walked out that door. To understand the silence of the man in the security booth, one must first understand the noise of the marriage that preceded it. Jason and Sarah Miller had been married for 3 years, a union that began with the bright, naive optimism of college sweethearts and had slowly eroded under the grinding weight of reality. Their apartment on the edge of town was a testament to their struggles, a cramped, one-bedroom unit where the walls were too thin and the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter grew taller each month. The air inside was perpetually stale, thick with the unsaid resentments that hang between two people who realize, too late, that love does not pay the rent. Jason Miller was a man exhausted by the very effort of existence. At 28, he carried the fatigue of someone twice his age. He worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. By day, he moved heavy crates at a logistics distribution center, his hands growing calloused and his back perpetually aching. By night, he put on the navy blue uniform of the security guard at Oakwood High, a job he had taken specifically to be closer to Sarah, to share a commute, to perhaps steal a few minutes of conversation during her lunch break. But those minutes rarely happened. He was painfully aware of the disparity between them. Sarah was a literature teacher, vibrant, ambitious, and surrounded by books and ideas. Jason felt small in her world. He felt like a fixture, a utility, something necessary but uninspiring, like the boiler in the school basement. He believed that if he just worked harder, if he just took one more shift, he could buy her the life she deserved, and the light would return to her eyes when she looked at him. Sarah, however, did not want a harder worker. She wanted a different life. She looked at Jason and saw a trap. His exhaustion bored her. His talk of overtime and budget cuts felt suffocating. She was 26, beautiful and intelligent, yet she felt her youth slipping away in a cycle of mediocrity. She didn't hate Jason, that would have been easier. She simply felt nothing for him anymore, just a dull pity that curdled into irritation whenever he fell asleep on the couch with his work boots still on. She wanted intellectual stimulation. She wanted power. She wanted to feel special, not just supported. Enter Richard Vance. The 62-year-old history department head was everything Jason was not. He drove a vintage Jaguar. He wore Italian suits. He spoke with the casual arrogance of a man who had seen the world and found it amusing. To Sarah, he was not an old man. He was a portal to the life she felt she was denied. The affair had begun 4 months prior, on a rainy Tuesday in late May, and under the guise of a mentorship discussion. It hadn't started with seduction, but with validation. Richard listened to her. He complimented her mind, not just her appearance. He made her feel that she was destined for greater things than a community high school and a security guard husband. The relationship quickly evolved from intellectual flirtation to physical intimacy. For Sarah, the affair was a drug. The illicit trysts in the supply closet, the stolen touches during faculty meetings, and the late-night grading sessions provided an adrenaline rush that replaced the numbness of her marriage. She didn't view herself as a villain. In her internal narrative, she was a romantic heroine stuck in a tragedy, finding solace where she could. She rationalized the betrayal with frightening ease. Jason wouldn't understand her needs. Jason was too simple. This was just a way to survive the suffocating boredom of suburbia. On the night of October 14th, hours before the incident in the classroom, the dynamic was fully at play. Jason had kissed her goodbye at the door of their apartment, handing her a thermos of coffee he had made. "Have a good class," he had said, his eyes soft with affection. Sarah had taken the coffee without making eye contact, already mentally cataloging the outfit she would wear for Richard later. She didn't see Jason's sacrifice. She only saw his servitude. As she drove to the school, her heart didn't race with guilt for the husband working a double shift to pay off her student loans. It raced with anticipation for the man who would treat her like a queen for an hour before going home to his empty, expensive house. She was chasing a fantasy, completely blind to the fact that the man she dismissed as simple was quietly observing the world with more clarity than she ever gave him credit for. Jason Miller did not walk to the side exit as he had promised. As his footsteps echoed down the empty corridor, a gnawing unease pulled at his gut, a subtle dissonance that he couldn't immediately place. It wasn't just the late hour or the unexpected presence of the department head. It was the physics of the scene he had just witnessed. Richard Vance, a man who prided himself on ergonomic chairs and lumbar support, had been perched awkwardly on the edge of his desk. And his legs. They hadn't been crossed or relaxed. They had been planted wide, rigid, like pillars creating a deliberate blockade. Jason stopped at the junction of hallway B and C, the silence of the school pressing in on him. He turned, not back toward the classroom, but toward the basement level, where the master security control room hummed in isolation. He didn't want to confront them without proof. He wanted to see what the shadows were hiding. The security office was a windowless box of stale air and electronics, illuminated solely by the cool blue wash of 24 LCD monitors mounted on the wall. It was Jason's sanctuary, the one place where he felt a semblance of control in a life that was spiraling out of his hands. He locked the heavy steel door behind him and sank into the swivel chair, the leather cracking under his weight. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering his admin code with practiced speed. He bypassed the live feeds of the gymnasium and the cafeteria, pulling up the archive for Camera 04, History Department, Room 304. He didn't watch the live feed, he needed the immediate past. He scrubbed the timeline back 5 minutes. The digital time code in the corner of the screen read 8:14 p.m. He watched himself enter the room. He watched the exchange, the meaningless pleasantries, the lie about the midterms. But this time, safe in the isolation of the booth, Jason saw what he had missed in person. He zoomed in. The footage was grainy, but the 4K upgrade the district had paid for last year offered enough clarity to ruin a life. There, in the deep shadow of the knee hole beneath the desk, was a patch of light gray fabric. It moved. Jason stopped breathing. He watched himself turn and leave the room on the screen. The door clicked shut. And then, the horror unfolded. He watched his wife, the woman whose coffee he had brewed that morning, crawl out from between another man's legs. He watched her stand up, smooth her skirt, the skirt he had bought her for her birthday, and wrap her arms around Richard Vance. When they kissed, Jason felt a physical blow to his chest, a sharp, hollow impact that knocked the wind out of him. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the monitor. He sat frozen, a statue of misery, watching the loop of his wife's infidelity play out in high definition. She was laughing. That was the detail that severed the last thread of his restraint. She wasn't just cheating. She was mocking him. She was celebrating her deception in the very building where he worked to support her. For 2 hours, Jason sat in the dark. The rage that initially flooded his veins began to cool, hardening into something brittle and sharp. He stared at the screen until the image burned into his retinas. His first instinct was to storm upstairs, to break down the door and shatter Richard's jaw, to drag Sarah home and scream until his throat bled. But then, the cold logic of poverty intervened. He looked at the stack of unpaid notices he kept in his locker. He thought about the credit card debt, the car payments, the crushing weight of their shared financial failures. If he divorced her now, he would be left with half the debt and none of the dignity. He would be the broke, cuckolded security guard living in a studio apartment, while Sarah would likely play the victim and move on to her wealthy, tenure-track lover. The injustice of it made his stomach churn. Why should he lose everything because she was a liar? Then a memory surfaced from the depths of his financial anxiety. January. The meeting with the insurance broker. They had taken out a mortgage protection life insurance policy, a term life plan worth $500,000 on each of them. It was meant to secure their future, a safety net they could barely afford the premiums for. Jason looked at Sarah's face on the frozen screen. She was smiling at Richard. In Jason's mind, the woman on the screen ceased to be his wife. She transformed into a liability, a bad investment, a thief who had stolen 3 years of his life. If she left him, he was ruined. If she died, he was free. The thought didn't horrify him. It clarified him. It was a terrifyingly simple equation. The humiliation vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He didn't need a lawyer. He needed an accident. A perfect, tragic, undeniable accident that would leave him the grieving widower with $500,000 and a fresh start. He reached for the mouse, not to delete the footage, but to save it to a hidden, encrypted folder. He would need a reminder of why he was about to do what he had to do. For the next 120 hours, Jason Miller gave the performance of a lifetime, transforming into the very picture of the devoted husband Sarah had stopped seeing years ago. He cooked dinner every night, filling their cramped apartment with the smells of garlic and roasted chicken, asking her about her students with a gentleness that bordered on eerie. He massaged her shoulders while she graded papers on the couch, his hands strong and steady, never betraying the fact that he was visualizing the anatomy of her neck rather than the tension in her muscles. Sarah, initially suspicious, quickly melted into relief. She interpreted his sudden attentiveness as a desperate attempt to win her back. A pathetic but convenient development that alleviated her guilt. She believed she had successfully compartmentalized her life, the exciting lover at school and the doting servant at home, unaware that the servant was currently calculating the exact trajectory of her demise. Jason watched her relax, watched her guard lower, and felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. She was no longer his wife, but a variable in an equation he was about to solve. While Sarah basked in her false security, Jason utilized his night shifts to turn Oakwood High School into a weapon. The school was undergoing a massive renovation in the West Wing, specifically the old library, which was being converted into a media center. It was a restricted zone, sealed off by plastic sheeting and danger construction signs, a labyrinth of exposed wiring, half-finished drywall, and darkness. Jason spent his shifts mapping this area with obsessive precision. He studied the schematics of the camera system, confirming what he already suspected. The contractors had cut the power to the cameras in the West Wing corridor to prevent false alarms from the dust and debris. It was a massive, gaping blind spot, a black hole in the school surveillance grid that stretched from the third-floor stairwell to the open shaft where the new freight elevator was being installed. It was perfect. It was a stage built for a tragedy. The logistics of the plan required physical props to sell the narrative of a break-in gone wrong. On Wednesday night, during a routine patrol of the basement maintenance office, Jason spotted the master key ring left carelessly on a hook by the lead foreman. With a sleight of hand practiced in his mind a dozen times, he removed the key to the construction padlock, pressed it into a block of modeling clay he had hidden in his pocket, and replaced it before the foreman returned from his smoke break. The next day, he drove 2 towns over to a hardware store, paying cash for a duplicate key. He also visited a Goodwill store, purchasing a pair of heavy work boots in size 12, 3 sizes larger than his own feet, and a thick pair of leather work gloves. These weren't for him to wear for protection. They were tools of deception. He planned to wear the oversized boots over his own shoes, to leave muddy prints in the hallway, suggesting a large, clumsy intruder had been stalking the grounds. By Friday morning, the plan was crystallized. Jason knew Sarah's schedule better than she did. Fridays were her late days. She stayed until 9 p.m. to finalize lesson plans for the coming week, enjoying the quiet of the empty building. Richard, however, always left at 4 p.m., sharp on Fridays for his weekend golf trips, leaving Sarah isolated and vulnerable. As Jason watched Sarah drink her coffee that morning, complaining about the rainy forecast, he felt a total dissociation from reality. The woman sitting across from him was not the person he had vowed to cherish. She was an obstacle worth exactly $500,000. He washed his bowl, kissed her on the forehead, a gesture that felt like sealing an envelope, and told her he would see her at the school later. "I'll bring you some dinner," he promised, his voice devoid of any tremor. "Don't work too hard." He walked out the door, the weight of the duplicate key in his pocket feeling less like brass and more like the trigger of a loaded gun. The rain began shortly after sunset on October 19, 2018, transforming the windows of Oakwood High School into mirrors of slick, black obsidian. By 9 p.m., the building was a hollow shell of silence, the laughter of students long replaced by the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the roof. Inside room 304, Sarah Miller sat alone. The romantic thrill of the week had evaporated. Richard Vance had departed hours ago for his weekend golf retreat, leaving Sarah with a stack of essays and a vague sense of abandonment. She checked her phone, hoping for a message from him, but the screen remained dark. The solitude of the school, usually her sanctuary, now felt oppressive. Just as she began packing her bag to leave, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Jason. "Honey, I'm in the West Wing basement. My radio battery died. I heard a loud crash near the old library, like glass breaking. Can you bring the master key ring from my locker? I don't want to go in without a weapon, and the pepper spray is on that ring. Please hurry." Sarah sighed, frustration warring with a flicker of concern. It was typical of Jason to be unprepared, to forget to charge his equipment, yet the mention of a crash in the dark, empty school pricked at her nerves. "I'm coming," she typed back, grabbing her coat. She walked out of the warm, well-lit history corridor and headed toward the West Wing. As she crossed the threshold into the renovation zone, the atmosphere shifted physically. The air grew colder, smelling of damp drywall, sawdust, and old copper. The hallway lights here had been deactivated for the electrical overhaul, leaving only the dim, amber glow of temporary work lamps strung along the floor like Christmas lights. She navigated through the plastic sheeting that hung from the ceiling, the translucent curtains fluttering in the draft, creating ghostly silhouettes that danced in her peripheral vision. "Jason!" she called out, her voice swallowed by the vast, unfinished space. There was no answer, only the sound of rain hammering against the exposed girders. She reached the central atrium of the old library, a space now gutted to its skeletal framework. In the center of the room lay the gaping mouth of the new freight elevator shaft, a dark, square void that dropped 3 stories down to the concrete foundation. The safety barriers were flimsy, just a few wooden sawhorses and yellow caution tape. Sarah paused, squinting into the gloom. "Jason, are you here?" she whispered, clutching her phone as a flashlight. From the shadows of a structural pillar, a figure emerged. It was Jason, but he looked wrong. He was wearing bulky, oversized boots that clanked heavily against the floor, and his face was unreadable in the low light. He didn't acknowledge her question. He didn't ask for the keys. He simply walked toward her with a terrifying, rhythmic purpose. Sarah lowered her phone. "Jason, you're scaring me. What is—" He didn't let her finish. He didn't scream, didn't accuse her of the affair, didn't offer a villainous monologue about betrayal. He simply closed the distance and, with a violent, decisive shove, pushed her backward. Sarah's heels skidded on the dust-covered concrete. Her arms flailed, grasping at the air, but there was nothing to hold. She fell into the void of the elevator shaft without a word, her scream erupting only after she had disappeared into the darkness. But a sound that was abruptly and sickeningly silenced by a dull thud 3 floors below. Jason stood at the edge of the precipice, looking down. He didn't tremble. He didn't cry. He immediately set to work on the stage. He kicked the wooden sawhorses aside, making it appear as though they had been knocked over in a panic. He took a water bottle from his pocket and emptied it onto the concrete near the edge, creating a slick, treacherous puddle to simulate a slip-and-fall accident caused by a roof leak. He walked heavily around the area in his oversized boots, stamping muddy prints that led away from the scene, suggesting an intruder had fled. Then, the hardest part began. He retreated to a dark corner, sat on a bucket of joint compound, and checked his watch. 9:04 p.m., he needed to be sure. He sat in the darkness with the body of his wife lying broken below him, listening to the rain, waiting for the life to drain completely from her. He waited exactly 15 minutes. At 9:19 p.m., ensuring there was no chance of rescue, he stood up, roughed up his hair, hyperventilated to induce a panic attack, and dialed 911. "Help!" He screamed into the receiver, tears finally flowing, summoned not by grief, but by performance. "My wife! I think she fell! Oh God, there's so much blood!" For 6 weeks following the funeral, it appeared that Jason Miller had successfully engineered the perfect tragedy. The coroner's official report classified Sarah Miller's death as blunt force trauma consistent with an accidental fall, citing the hazardous conditions of the construction zone and the wet floor. The community of Oakwood rallied around the grieving widower, bringing him casseroles and offering tearful condolences, unaware that the man weeping in the front pew was mentally calculating the payout date of a $500,000 insurance policy. Jason played his role with Academy Award-winning precision, portraying a man shattered by loss, even as he privately finalized the paperwork for the claim. He believed he had scrubbed the world clean of his motive. He had wiped the security hard drives in the booth on the night of the murder, reformatting the disk to ensure the footage of Sarah's infidelity, and his subsequent surveillance was gone forever. He walked through the town like a ghost, confident that the silence of the dead would protect him. However, the architecture of a lie always has a structural flaw, and Jason's flaw was named Detective Elias Thorne. Thorne, a veteran investigator with 30 years on the force, could not shake a nagging inconsistency in the timeline. While the physical evidence at the scene pointed to an accident, the behavioral evidence didn't sit right. Thorne began digging into the background of the couple, looking for cracks in the facade of their happy marriage. He subpoenaed Jason's work logs, not just for the night of the death, but for the weeks prior. On the night of October 14th, the night of the affair, Jason's handwritten log stated he was on external perimeter patrol from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Yet, if the electronic keycard access data for the security booth showed that Jason had swiped in at 8:10 p.m. and never swiped out until nearly midnight. He had been sitting in that booth for hours when he claimed to be walking outside. Suspicious, Thorne brought in a forensic IT specialist to examine the school's server room. This was where Jason's arrogance met its match. Jason had deleted the footage from the local hard drive in the booth, unaware that the school district had installed a redundant RAID backup server in the IT basement 3 months earlier, a server that automatically mirrored all data every 24 hours. The recovery of the files was the turning point. When Detective Thorne played the file dated October 14, 2018, the narrative of the grieving husband disintegrated instantly. The police watched in stunned silence as Sarah Miller hid under the desk, then crawled out to kiss Richard Vance. But more damning was the realization of what followed. The logs proved Jason was watching this feed live. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution born of humiliation. The motive was no longer a mystery, it was glaringly obvious in high definition. On a snowy morning in December 2019, police surrounded Jason's apartment. He was drinking coffee, waiting for the insurance check that would never arrive, when they kicked down the door. He didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. It was as if he had been waiting for the other shoe to drop. The trial, held in early 2020, was a spectacle of cold indifference. The prosecution played the tape of the affair, then the tape of Jason's interrogation where his grieving mask finally slipped. But the moment that sealed his fate came during his own testimony. When the prosecutor asked if he felt any remorse for pushing his wife into the dark void of an elevator shaft, Jason looked at the jury with dead, shark-like eyes. He leaned into the microphone and delivered a sentence that would haunt the courtroom for years. "I didn't choose to kill her. She chose death the moment she crawled under that desk. I just helped her find the way out." There were gasps in the gallery, but Jason remained unmoved. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Jason Miller was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fallout extended beyond the prison walls. Richard Vance, the man whose indiscretion had inadvertently sparked the fuse, was never charged with a crime, but his life was effectively over. The scandal cost him his job, his reputation, and his pension. He was ostracized by the community, viewed not as a victim, but as the catalyst for a young woman's death. He spent his remaining years alone in his expensive house, a prisoner of his own guilt, drinking to drown out the memory of a kiss that cost a life. The case of the Millers became a grim local legend, a cautionary tale proving that while you can wipe a hard drive, you can never truly delete the truth. The case is closed, but the haunting image of Jason's soulless stare in that dark security booth remains. He didn't scream, and he didn't lash out when he witnessed his wife's betrayal. Instead, he sat in absolute silence, rewinding that tape over and over again, meticulously crafting a perfect plan. And that is the most terrifying aspect of true hatred, not the noise, but the deadly silence. What is your verdict on Jason's reaction? Was he a broken man pushed past his breaking point, or a cold-blooded psychopath who was just waiting for an excuse to strike? And ask yourself this: if you were Jason, staring at that betrayal on camera 04, what would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them and discussing the theories with you. If you enjoy this style of storytelling and want to dive deeper into criminal case files like this one, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. There are so many more dark secrets hidden behind the lens of security cameras that we have yet to uncover. Thank you for watching until the very end. Good night, and remember to double-check your locks tonight.